Ladies and gentlemen, can I ask you please to take your seats?
We're just missing the top guys from later.
Are we recording on those two cameras already?
Yeah,
Oh.
we are
Didn't
recording.
we start? Oh.
We didn't stop actually
Okay.
because they are recording.
Okay.
Cut. One thing is a cut.
Oh, okay. Let me just do this introduction. Oh, are you going to manage this introduction?
No, he can manage it.
Who? Hey, come and manage it. You just tell him. So he's going to be introduced, and then you tell him to speak because I need to go and manage the camera. Right?
What?
So you're going to unmute and tell him to start. He's ready.
Oh, okay. Cool.
Yeah. And then he can show you his face there. At least you've got a job to do.
Hi, my name. What's that? So, where's the face?
No, this is going to be our face. He doesn't want to see us, so he can do the face himself that side.
He doesn't want to see us how.
No, because we want to see him on that screen.
Yes.
Yes.
So, hence we must start.
No, he doesn't want to see us. We must see him. So that screen is for him to show his face.
Yes, but they must be started first.
Okay. Should we tell him to go ahead and start?
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. You may start.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everybody. I am Mr. Louis, the Director of Operation ASECNA. And I'm going to present you what the DJ, Mr. Mohamed Musa, was going to present during this meeting. First of all, I want to to apologize for the fact that he is not at this important meeting. because of the problem of passports, but we think that this problem is now solved. Before presenting this topic, let me thank ETS for inviting ASECNA to this important meeting and all the organizer of this meeting. I want first, before going deeply, present our organization ASECNA, and my presentation will focus on 5 important points. The first one, after the presentation of ASECNA, I will talk a little bit about the area of cooperation. What was our achievement? The new area of cooperation, of collaboration we need for air navigation service providers in South Africa, and what we think as important for the future in breaking barriers in Africa. ASECNA, to be brief, is air navigation service provider for 18 countries in Africa. Today we have 59 here. We have our own network infrastructure to deal with the traffic. We have also a strong experience in equipment, installation, and also an aircraft for calibration for all our navigation. We have also a long experience in implementation of visa station all along our area. Today we have 3 training schools, one in Niger, second in Douala, Cameroon, and the third one in Dakar. We also have a long tradition of cooperation with the user, particularly with IATA. Every year, we have our meeting. We have one meeting with IATA to see our investment plan and also what we can do to improve safety in the area. This map shows you briefly the wide of our network in Africa. We are linked to all the ASP around us. We have also a strong link with South America, with the network already, and also with Europe via France and Spain. We have a business station in that area to allow us to be connected in Europe. Our airspace is wide of about 16 million square kilometers in Africa and Indian Ocean. We usually today about 17 radar to cover all our area. What is for us the area of cooperation is, first of all, is the development of infrastructure in aviation. As we know, the liberalization of air transport is a predictable increase in air traffic, and that's our air control center has to take over. And today we are going to bear this responsibility in the best possible safety condition. That's why ASECNA has made a lot of investments in CNS and ATM systems, especially the implementation of surveillance radar, high performance means of communication based on satellite technology, but also in the training of qualified staff. We have implemented a safety management system, SMS, that will enhance the performance. The investment program ASECNA will continue every year after some coordination with the user in order to improve safety distribution. Our area of cooperation is also the exchange of information on program and project, research, exchange also of personal and expertise, interconnection of network. I will come back on this topic. Very important for us today with all our neighbors as ATNX, as NAMA in Nigeria, as Ghana, and also brothers in Sierra Leone. This to improve air traffic service operation between all the ASAs. Our area of cooperation is also the best cost-effective and maintenance solution for the interconnection of our network, training, and most important today is the peer review of air traffic navigation service provider. Our achievement today is the MOU we have signed with the air navigation service provider in activation. We have the main one is MOU signed with ATNS. This has allowed us today to connect our two networks. Today, ArtisNet, the network belonging to ASECNA and Nigeria. And Ghana is linked to the one to Sarepan, belonging to ATNS, and also to Natisat. This allows today the connection between our air navigation service provider to share information and share also expertise. This video shows us the network we have today in our active region. You can see the network of ArtisNet, which is today linked to the one of SADC and the second, the Natisat, also in active region. And we are also linked to South America, as I was saying in the beginning, with the radio network and the one implemented SAL in the ocean is PAXAS. So today, with this network implemented our vision, we are able to talk with all our NSAs in active region and also able to talk with the NSAs in South Africa and also in Europe. The achievement also is the development of regional and inter-regional transport communication and infrastructure. I tell you, ArtisNet belongs not only to ASECNA, 18 countries, but also to Nigeria. It belongs also to Ghana. It belongs also to Rivers Empire, which is empire belonging to Sierra Leone, Guinea, and Nigeria. Our also view is to improve our air navigation service across Africa for interconnection and interoperability of the network. Other achievement in ASECNA is exchange of information on program, project, research. The best cost-effective and maintenance solution of interconnection of the network, and particularly the training of staff. Today we have a strong and important relation with ATS for the training of our people and also for exchanging information. And also this cooperation with ATS allow us to have a view to the future of active vision. That's why the goal of our Director General is to build for all Africa a single sky. This single site don't mean a single air navigation service provider. That means have an airspace in which we have the same procedure, we have common regulation to allow all the traffic from one area to another area to fly smoothly without barriers. Our new area of collaboration is the implementation of active integrated regional infrastructure. That's why we signed a new MOU with ATLS, and in that MOU will improve all the questions of cyber security and all the questions of the new module to be implemented during the years coming as part of the global air navigation plan. We have also a problem of the spectrum to protect. Today we know that many domains are coming, and we have many interference today in our system, and we need to improve our relationship, to know how together to go and fight against that new problem we are facing. As a new area also of collaboration, today we have signed an MOU with Ghana, as a second signed an MOU with Ghana, NAMA and with Robert FIR, to share all our information, to share also the data we have in our airspace. NAMA has some data, we also have data, and our data also can cover part of the airspace belonging to NAMA and Ghana, and vice versa. So for that reason, and according to the conclusion of our meeting, we have decided to share this information. And we have signed an MOU, and last week in Montreal, the 3DJ they had a meeting for that reason, and they gave the mandate to the DG of NAMA, and together they will go to see ECOWAS in order to see how to finance together the re-engineering of the system. This will allow us to share and to facilitate the interconnection between all the network in the area. We have also many memorandum of cooperation with Algeria, with France, with Morocco. All these MOU help us to build together a single standard for Africa. This map shows you a little bit covering the radar covering in ASECNA area in West and Central Africa, and what we are now in the process of sharing with NAMA, with Ghana, and with Roberts. Our problem today is the station in the deserts, in many areas where we have security problem. That's why today we have decided ASECNA to move quickly toward an space, because all our system in that area cannot maintain them easily because of the security problem. So for the question of surveillance, today we have moved toward the space base, and we are now making the survey in our centers, and we think that in 2020 we will be able to implement it in all our areas. And we know also that ATNS and other ANSs in Africa are let me come now to what is big and very important to our DG, the building of the single site for Africa. I was saying in the beginning that the single site is the reason why our DG has been appointed as new director general of SECNA. And for our member states, it's important today to go toward all the other air navigation service providers who have a similar goal for the 2030. For us, the single sky needs to be implemented in all Africa to be able in 2030 to implement all the new technology that is decided by the ICAO Council. This single sky for us is very simple. We have the flight, we wanted the level from 245 until flight level 600. We wanted this area to be covered by all the air navigation service with the same procedure. In terms of navigation, we think that we can use GNSS with some augmentation. Today in Africa, we have the full support of all our states to implement experts in our area. The study has been already done, and now we are in the trial phases. In terms of surveillance, as I was talking previously, we think that the radar we can use but are limited in some areas because of security problem. That's why today we think that the ADC space will be the main and the main equipment for surveillance. And in terms of communication in that area, for us it's better to use the CPDSA that's also been accepted by our acquisition. And that will allow us with the other air navigation service provider to have a common procedure in that airspace, and we will be able at this moment to implement a single site for Africa. We will not have only one ACC to deal with the traffic, but all the ACC in charge of this area will have common airspace. And we have one procedure, and we allow the traffic, all the airlines in that area go easily from one part to another part without knowing that there is barriers. They are going through the limit of some states. In terms of conclusion, this is we say that it's an opportunity, this kind of meeting and the relation we have with all the ASVs in Africa is an opportunity for Africa and for air navigation service provided to improve and sustain the air navigation service and to improve the framework and to take into account the usual needs in the continuous improvement process of our air navigation service provider. We know that the future is to be together. Alone, you cannot do good things. That's why our aim, our goal is to be together. All we do now, all ASEAN will do now, is to see in what way they can coordinate with all the ANSA in the area and to have a common solution. That's why we are fully engaged in the new review mechanism we have implemented with ICAO, with AGNS, with Council today, and this will help us to improve the safety level in each ANSA and know Africa to have a safety sky as in all parts of the world. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nklube, for your address on behalf of your DG, and please convey to him our heartfelt thanks and gratitude. And we have missed him, but we're grateful that you were able to join us today by the live streaming. So thank you again, and everyone again, please applause. Right, where are the techie people? I need you to. There we go. Right. Thank you. Oops. Oof. Shall I?
Yeah, so just a sec.
You good?
Yes, we are good, sir.
Okay, cool. I'll let you
He
carry
will
on away.
reconnect.
Okay, and there's a mobile phone there. Okay, in the interest of time, and because I'm painfully conscious that we are running woefully late, before we introduce the next speakers and the panel discussion, you'll notice that there is a questionnaire that's been placed in front of you. If you wouldn't mind, please fill this in and leave it where you're sitting. It will be collected later. And I've been assured your feedback is invaluable and would be greatly appreciated. So please do share your feedback. It's important. I know that the team at ATNS want to make sure that this remains a relevant and topical event on the calendar. And so with your feedback and input, they can make sure that they tailor it to your expectations as well going forward. It's my pleasure now to call up to the podium Ms. Poppy Koza, who is the moderator for the first panel discussion. Ms. Koza is the Director of Civil Aviation at the South African Civil Aviation Authority. She's worked in various management portfolios, has an extensive experience in the field of aviation, with over 15 years in senior. Ms. Koza's no stranger to any of us in the industry. She's definitely our biggest cheerleader. She's an acclaimed and an award-winning executive and a leader. And we're honored to have you with us today, Poppy. Thank you. And I'll leave it to you to call up your panel. The panel is going to be addressing the topic, which is, can barriers in the aviation industry be overcome by innovative technology without sacrificing the level of safety? And of course, with Poppy representing the Civil Aviation Authority and the regulator, the discussion is clearly also going to touch on how do we find that balance between what is approved, what's regulated, and at the same time being disruptive, breaking boundaries, being the leaders. So over to you, ma'am.
I know that we are racing against time, so we will try and make it snappy, if that will be a term. So I will be moderating the session, as indicated by the program director, which will look at a very complex topic, which has already been introduced. Can barriers in the aviation industry be overcome by innovative technology without sacrificing the levels of safety? So as we know, the aviation industry, by its very nature, relies on innovative technologies, whether we refer to aircraft, whether we refer to airport systems, air traffic management systems, or aviation security systems. So these technologies, however, they come with their own risks and challenges. But, you know, as I was preparing for this session, I stopped a bit and I pondered. And I thought, wow, we've come a long way as the aviation industry. And I think it is only proper that one has to admit that this very industry has indeed endeavored to ensure that the advancement in technology does not compromise aviation safety and security, but in fact has enhanced the operational effectiveness and general aviation systems. I think if we think back where aviation comes from and where aviation is now, it could only be realized through the advancement in technology. So to help me deal with this subject, I will now invite the panel members in the following order. Dr. Francois Mastorp from CSIR. I will ask you to join us on stage. I will also invite Mr. Sam Twala. There has been a slight change in our program, so we've got 2 replacements. So Ms. Arti Pandey could no longer join us, so she has been replaced by Mr. Sam Twala. Mr. Arthur Bradshaw, please join us on stage from Air Traffic Management, or rather an advisor for Air Traffic Management Systems. Dr. George Simata, Secretary to the Cabinet, Office of the Prime Minister, Republic of Namibia. Dr. Simata is no stranger to us. He gave us a presentation earlier on. Mr. Chris Zwegenthal, the CEO from Airlines Association of Southern Africa, as well as Ms. Lisa Dele, who is an ATNS project manager, IRM. I don't see Ms. Lisa Dele, or there she comes. So, Program Director, I will not go through the biographies of the panel members because of time constraints. I have briefly indicated where they're coming from, and I believe that the organizers will be able to share with us the biographies in full. We will also not have presentations, so we will dive into the Q&A. Of course, we do have a question before us, and that question is, can barriers in the aviation industry be overcome by innovative technology without sacrificing the level of safety? So I will start with Dr. Mastorp to answer that question. Can the aviation industry be overcome by innovative technology without sacrificing the levels of safety?
Yes, I do believe so. In one of my presentations I did earlier yesterday, is something called passive radar. That is, for example, innovative technology that's up and coming. So it's been researched at the moment. It provides a very cost-effective solution to air traffic control, and it might be a solution to that. So that's one of those disruptive technologies we've been talking about, and being of benefit of air surveillance to air traffic controllers, for example.
Thank you, Dr. Mastorp. Mr. Bradshaw?
Thanks, Poppy. The short answer is actually yes, but it's not only yes, but it simply has to be like that. With the rollout of the ATM operational concept, ICAO's concept, which also guides the various plans, the global plan, regional plan, and those plans are, of course, in pursuance of efficiencies and increased safety due to the fact of the number of aircraft that are going to be populating the sky. You heard the number this morning. I think it was doubling in the next 10 or 15 years. That is going to create tremendous user requirements. The new user requirements are going to demand CNS innovation. Whether they consider disruptive or passive today is neither here nor there, but they are going to create demands for sure. The development of these innovations will demand safety cases. So whatever the users require, the CNS will have to come to the party, deliver the goods, but you cannot implement it unless it is done safely. So the answer is definitely yes.
Thank you, Mr. Bradshaw. My apology. I understood that Dr. Simata was going to be part of the panel, but there's been a slight change, so he will not be on the panel. So I'll jump to Mr. Zwegenthal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Obviously, the answer from my perspective is definitely yes. And in fact, new technology should not impact on levels of safety. But let me just put two factors from my perspective as I thought about this topic. We do need regulation where safety is concerned. And I think one of the issues with new technology is we've got to understand what that new technology actually means when it's introduced, and to ensure that people who are putting regulations together, whether it be the total community, actually understand what is required to ensure that the proper regulation of that new technology is actually incorporated to ensure safety is not impacted. I'd also like to say that we need to understand and get an understanding from the manufacturers of this new technology that to what extent we're barriers and other issues and factors need to ensure that when we introduce new technology, which may be safety case related, that we ensure that all jurisdictions, specifically from neighbouring states, are exactly in the same situation in terms of implementation, so that we don't have a implementation in a specific state which is regulated, but we can have visitors who may not be able to comply with those specific standards or new technology. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Zwegenthal. Ms. Dele?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning, everyone. I believe that, yes, the innovative technology is important. I think it's important that we become innovative in the industry. I mean, earlier on this morning, we were discussing a topic on cybersecurity, and if we don't introduce technologies and we're not innovative, we then opening ourselves or the industry to threats or to us being attacked, like the speaker was saying this morning. So I think we really need to be open to this. I think it is a solution. So my answer is yes.
Thank you, Ms. Dele. Mr. Twala?
Thank you, Madam Chair. From my side, I definitely believe yes, it is possible to balance profits and innovation and safety, and that is not actually something completely new. If you look at ICAO, Annex 19, there's a model there where they say there must be a good balance between the two, and what is obvious, if that balance is not well achieved, you put too much emphasis on, let's say, safety. It means naturally, as an airline, if in this case you're talking, I've made an example with airline, chances are you're going to go under simply because you put too much emphasis on safety and you forget about what's happening on the left. But at the same time, if you put too much emphasis on the left and you care less about safety, obviously, as well as an airline, if I make an example with the airline, you are going under. So that balance, it has to happen, if I can put it that way.
Thank you. So I think, Mr. Zwegenthal, you've touched on the issue of manufacturers. How do we strike the balance? Because I know that the industry is haste. In fact, the industry is, there are demands, from the commercial side of wanting to sharpen the competitive edge, wanting to bring about efficiencies, and so on. But you find that the regulators who have to kind of, put the regulatory framework in place to regulate whatever new technology in place. A case in point is the remotely piloted aircraft systems, where regulators are in fact grappling to regulate this new innovation or new technology in the civilian airspace. How do we collaborate and make sure that the regulators, they don't then stifle, progress and growth and, the efficiencies that the industry, is so desire? How do we make sure that, we meet the needs of all role players in the value chain?
Thank you. I think that it's a, all these new regulations or the new technology comes up, it has to be translated into standards and practices, probably through ICAO, and then obviously into international legislation. For me, one of the big important aspects is you've got to take account of all the stakeholders that are actually involved in this process. So if there's a new technology that comes out that has to be implemented from a safety case perspective, in many cases, sometimes we find that those particular technology is not readily available to be implemented worldwide. So you may actually have a series of phased-in processes to be able to implement technology and get the regulations in place. I think you need a coordinated discussion between regulator in a particular state, with the OEMs, or the manufacturers of particular equipment, as well as the operators, to ensure that they're ready, as well as the service providers, such as the ATNSs or the AXAs, that have to implement and procure the equipment that's actually going to start monitoring and measuring whether implementation according to certain standards. So for me, it's a question of an important planning process and a realistic time frame for implementation. We know that there's certain aspects, and in a case may be an example which you are certainly aware of. Let's take TCAS 7.1, for example, where that had to be implemented, but I don't think in many cases, as you're aware, many of the operators were necessarily ready when it had to be implemented. Yeah, so we had to get waivers, or you had to get exemptions for certain periods of time to ensure that everybody did it. So we got it according to time. An example for that's currently on the table is ADSB, which needs to be done by 2020. But we know that there's time frame differences between operators, let's say ATNS, and probably getting the regulations in place so that you can do it. So there has to be an alignment of purpose in terms of putting the necessary regulations in place to ensure that we can implement the new technology and get the benefits out of it.
Thank you. Any panel member who wants to perhaps add on that? No. Okay. So I will ask another question. So, Dr. Mastorp, the role of research cannot be overemphasized, particularly in this sector, which continues to push boundaries. How do we coordinate our technological efforts such that they are understood to seek to promote efficiencies as well as socioeconomic development in the country? Sometimes new technologies are seen as threats to employment. And of course, now we are already talking about the fourth industrial revolution. And I do believe that, some corners are already, saying you bring in technology, it means you're going to undermine, the labor processes or systems. And how do we manage that balance or the aspirations from all corners?
Okay, well, from my perspective, maybe the first part of the question is the research side, and then the socioeconomic development and growth, how we achieve that. We basically need to consider a closer collaboration between basically three entities in my mind: academia, institutes, and then industry as well. This is also sort of pointed out by Mr. Francis Xavier Richard this morning in his presentation on digital transformation. And then we also obviously need to bring in the regulators into this whole process as well. So maybe just a little of a background then. So the academics then typically do the blue sky research. That is not necessarily directed. You have institutes that typically identify these blue sky research topics, for example, the CSR here in South Africa, and then sort of mature those technologies to a certain extent. And then industry takes that on. It's not the role of the CSR to produce, for example, products. But the industry then develops these products typically have directed research on this. So from the products that's been developed, there's new questions being asked in terms of how you're going to improve your products. That then typically flows back to the institutes, flowing back to academics. You have this forwards and backwards of questions. And in that case, you can, for example, also see all the real questions coming from industry, and the regulators go to academia, and from that perspective, you have students involved in that as well. So you're starting at a very young age to directed research for students, so human capital development comes into play. And then the benefit for the industry, obviously, they get this research flowing through to the products, and they, at the end of the day, deliver better products. So, and that's sort of where you want to. So in summary, on leveraging on something like the strength of academia, the institutes, as well as industry, in a collaborative way, that's the important fashion. It's a collaborative way. Also with the regulators, you can churn out superior products, and that will also increase your human capital development programs as well. Okay, that will address the socioeconomic development and growth of that. Maybe on your second part, so the labor versus machines. We basically need a few things. We need to upskill our technical workforce through collaboration process, as I just mentioned. We also need to foster and stimulate innovation. This is also talked about by Mr. Chetty this morning in one of his keynote addresses. We need to foster that. And we need to strive to have better products, superior products. Okay, so that's eventually where everything lies into this and delivering value in the whole chain. So if you have a highly innovative people together with tech-savvy workforce, that will allow you to grow your industry and create brand new businesses. And through that process, you actually stimulate your employment, and then you have the machines that will actually stimulate the capacity or make products faster, quicker, and more cheaper. And that's sort of the value that you can bring to the whole thing.
Wow, thank you.
Thank you.
I think you've said a mouthful.
Yeah.
But I think...
Sorry.
No, I'm yeah, in a good way.
Okay.
But I think what I'm picking up is that collaboration and more collaboration is key.
Yes, that's right. And that's all the way from industry straight through to academia. And that's where the actual human capital development starts at a young age. And they're directed, they have relevant research and work to do in that specific field. And that then can flow through to industries. They can work at the partners or the industry at one day.
Sure. Thank you so much. Mr. Bradshaw, harmonization of standards and processes is key to the aviation industry. So to manage fragmentation of technological development from different jurisdictions or different countries, what should we do to maintain consistency and harmonization?
I'm glad you actually started providing the answer there during your summation, and that is collaboration, collaboration, collaboration. If one looks at the mantra, the ICAO mantra at the moment, nobody left behind, and you tie that to the ATM operational concept that was planned to pan out by the year 2025 and adopted by the globe as the print, which informs, and I've mentioned it in my previous answer, it informs the global plan, which informs the regional plan, which informs the national plan, which informs entities' plans. And all those plans have to talk to each other. There has to be harmonized. You cannot have an entity plan that is contrary to what the global plan says. And everything's supposed to be in harmony right from the top throughout every entity in our business. The whole ATM community, in other words, must have the same time frame within their heads of where we're going, what are we going to do, how are we going to get there. Now, with ICAO saying nobody being left behind, and together with the concept, if one studies the concept, you'll see, and it was mentioned this morning, and I'm glad it was, the days of silos are over. We are all members of the ATM community. The ATM community has a job of work to do, and it makes its requirements known to the CNS part of the business, and they must deliver the goods. The safety cases have to be done, and we need to be talking to our neighbors on how we're going to do that, because one has to bear in mind our neighbors have the same regional plan that we've got. And we need to make sure that they aren't left behind when they develop their national plans so that our plans are in harmony. There is, after all, areas of routing within the global plan, and we form parts of areas where we need to be talking to neighbors about our very plans. Now, I am happy to say that in South Africa, in the wisdom of the Department of Transport, they've got the ATM CNS Implementation Committee, which is helping the process. Because all those elements that are falling out, the CNS elements that people are saying, which way do we go, are being thrashed out at expert level. Can we fit the time within the time frame? How do we inform ICAO of the time scales that are possible within our region? So it's a two-way street, and it has to be a two-way street. And so I do believe, Poppy, that there is mechanisms in place. People need to do their homework on those plans. They need to understand the concept of the ATM concept, which says technology must not drive the system. ATM has to make plans to move the right amount of aircraft safely given a time frame. And CNS has to come along and provide us the solutions. And then let's talk to each other who are affected by the different levels of the plan. So that is, sorry, a very long answer for a short question.
So I do have a follow-up question. So what happens in an imperfect world? I've made an example earlier that RPES, for instance, ICAO was never ready, and ICAO is still not ready in terms of establishing the global standards. And then you find having to deal, you know, with the emergence of this technology in their own way, which is kind of fragmented because there is nothing that binds all countries, or they're not looking up to one thing, which would be ICAO in this case. How do we do? I'm very jittery with the fourth industrial revolution because I'm not so sure what it's going to bring. I think RPES has taught us a lesson. How do we navigate in situations such as those ones?
You know, the concept document came out in 2000, and it was adopted by the Globe at the Air Navigation Conference in 2003. And that plan, or that concept document, actually says, guys, you've got to sit down and start considering the fact that in the future there's going to be unmanned aerial vehicles, and you better start doing something about it now. Now, ICAO is a two-way street, and people don't realize that. And I think that's one of the strengths of the ATM CNS committee, because one of their tasks on their terms of reference is to inform upwards what needs to be debated at ICAO level so that we can make the thing work. Now, RPES is a very good example, as you've mentioned. There's things starting to roll out at Mach 2, and people have been caught unawares. They didn't think, in fact, somebody told me one day, you smoke in your socks. And I said, guys, it's going to happen. So it's up to us now to, in fact, start informing ICAO of our successes, what we are finding, and what needs to be looked at. I'm very glad to say that that committee has taken a two-pronged approach. There's a work group that's specifically dedicated for UAVs, and every single other work group has to take the UAV potential hazard, or whatever you want to call it, into the work that they're busy with, whether it's the surveillance work group or whether it's the airspace design work group. They've all got to have a look at what the impact is. So I believe we've made a start. I think we're one of the first countries that had some form of regulation. I think we are really starting to learn. We now need to take those lessons and pump it upstream so that other countries can benefit from what we learn, and in turn we should be learning from what other countries have done that we have not done yet.
Thank you very much. Mr. Zwegenthal, what role does stakeholder involvement and communication, underlying communication, play in overcoming the barriers?
Yeah, I think we're all in favor of new technology, and we want that to work. But one of the biggest things which I started to allude to in my previous answers to a question is the necessity for us all to be on board and to be aligned. So communication between all the various stakeholders. When I talk about the regulator, the service providers, the operators, I missed somebody, I'm sure. But that all those people need to be on the same page. And we talked about collaboration. Well, Arthur mentioned collaboration. Collaboration for me is communication and liaison and alignment of purpose. So, and we learn, and I think the important thing is that each of us have got our own levels of expertise, especially when you talk about, I talk from an association perspective, I'm certainly not the expert in every area by any manner of means, and we need experts involved to be able to, particularly say from the airline side, who are on the right at the sharp end, who are actually able to assist us with specific information. But that communication, that interchange of information is essential. We've all got to learn, as I said, and I think when we start talking about this new technology, cost may be an issue, lead time may be an issue, training may be an issue, and we've just got to get to the bottom of all those things in terms of talking around, and that's why I talk about time frame and phasing this in. And then just to touch on another aspect related to across the region, which I mentioned earlier, and then Arthur also alluded to, one of the important things in SADC region is, as you know, you're very much part of it, is the SADC Civil Aviation Committee. We have all the 15 SADC states sitting at a committee talking about new developments and new technologies, and that I think we've actually got to find a way to expand that agenda in terms of maybe new technology, even dealing with things like, well, let's go back to the cybersecurity aspect, because it's starting to become a threat. And those are very important forums where you can exchange information, communicate your latest developments, to make sure that everybody's ready to roll out the initiative according to a specific time frame, and that we're already at the same time and we all synchronize. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Zwegenthal. Ms. Daly, do you think the regulators are up to speed? I suppose that question is kind of related with the question that I had asked Mr. Bradshaw. Are the regulators up to speed to meet the demands of the industry? And if they are not, what must be done?
Thank
You are not referring to this regulator. Others. I'm talking about others.
Certainly not. Okay. Regulators in the aviation industry, they take the leading role in order for all the stakeholders, being the air navigation service providers, the aircraft providers, the service providers, and the aircraft operators and the airport operators, for them to provide safe and sufficient and expeditious service. So I think then, because of the rapid growth in technology and the advancement in technologies, I see we have already have technologies like artificial intelligence breaking in, and the Internet of Things coming into our industry. So I think that manufacturers, they tend to adapt very early into these technologies breaking into any industry, and especially in our industry, which is aviation. So the regulators, in my opinion, I think they lag in adapting or being ready with the advancement of technology, and mainly because that the regulators have to make sure that there is sustainability. They need to make sure that there is return on investment, and so that is, I think that is why then they tend to lag. They're not up to speed, according to my opinion, with the technology advancements. And also, I think because the technology is driven by the market pool and by the socio-economic developments, so regulators are then expected by governments, as the agencies of the government, to provide the service or develop regulations around aviation or around technology in aviation. But because of all these challenges, that the technology is advancing at a very rapid growth or at a very high rate, and regulators, they develop regulations which are expected to be developed from a period of about 2 to 3 years before they even get published. And then these regulations are then also expected to be in place for a number of years, obviously for the reasons of sustainability. So So yes, so on that, I think that they tend to lag a bit.
So you are challenging the regulators to step up their game. So
Yes.
anyone who's a regulator, please, the message is loud and clear. Regulators, you're stifling the industry, step up your game. Mr. Twala, so technology and profits, right, versus safety, which comes first?
Jeez.
So you talked about an airline closing down. So an airline wants to be profitable
Yes.
in order for it to stay afloat.
Mm.
But it also wants to enhance, its own systems. It wants to stand out, amongst and be counted as the best.
Yes.
And for it to be counted as the best, it's got to have the right technologies. It's got to be profitable as well.
Yes.
But there is this aspect which cannot be neglected, and that is safety.
Yes.
How do we balance the two?
I guess this is what you get by standing at the back of a queue, because you get the most difficult question. And on top of that, it's quite difficult as well to talk about the safety, because it means now you have to talk about the regulator. And what makes it even more difficult is when you have a director of civil aviation in a room. And I've seen some executives as well from the CAA. So the question is, do I become brutally honest, or do I prefer to choose relations? But to make it, what I mentioned earlier is the concept of balancing profits and safety is not something completely new. It's something that is in the AKO annexes, if you're aware of AKO annexes, Annex 19. And what I can say on that is, I just want to get this right. Talking about innovation, we cannot take away that innovation, there's a direct relationship between innovation and profits. So now we can also, now it means we can look at innovation, profits versus safety in that context. And one thing that is important that we have to take into account is ICAO, they do what they write is a recommendation, standards and recommended practices. So the implementation of that still rests with the regulator, including all other stakeholders, to make sure that we get that balance right, simply because at the ICAO level, or if you look at annexes, they're not going to tell you how. With that being said, two examples which I can make is one of the biggest expense in aviation, I understand to be fuel. If you look at technological advances which have happened over the decades, they've tried to make sure that the expense which comes, which is attributed to fuel, is lower and lower. And one of the examples, it's something that is in everyone's lips these days, is talking about remotely powered aircraft systems. It's a new entrant in our aviation space, and by far, they really try to reduce costs in so many ways. But that does not necessarily mean they are unsafe.
Mr. Twala, profits or safety?
Yes. Okay, let me make an example of how, what I'm saying at the end of the day is there must be a balance. We cannot really say profits and forget about safety, or we cannot say safety and forget about profits. But in order to optimize that balance, one of the things that we need to take into account, and there's a good example which I can refer to what the EASA, European Aviation Safety Agency, what they've done a few years ago. They've looked at regulations around general aviation. And what they did is they moved away from prescriptive regulations, and they introduced a concept of looking at objective and outcome-based regulation. And I believe for regulators, that should be a way to go going forward. And one good example that I can give with that is, last time I read regulations, I'm not sure if it's still the same. There was a requirement that each and every aircraft must have a compass, right? And that's how it is.
Profits or safety?
Yes. No, I'm getting there.
Because I need to move on. I want to open the.
Oh, is it?
I want to take the question from the floor.
I'm almost at the end. Almost. Let me just close this one quickly. We need to move away from that type of writing regulations and look at what is the objective other than prescribing what should be on board of aircraft. Yesterday, Dr. Malinga actually made an example or spoke a bit about air taxi. And air taxi, if you look at regulations today, it defies each and every rule in a book today, right? But that does not necessarily make it safer, unsafe.
Okay.
But obviously there are benefits in terms of the profits will be higher, if you use that kind of a technology other than what we already have today.
Thank you very much, Mr. Twala. You still have not fully answered my question, but I can read between the lines. Ladies and gentlemen, the program director has just signaled that, of course, I have not exhausted my 45 minutes, but I understand the pressures. So I think we're going to leave it at that. I was hoping that perhaps we will take a question or two from the floor, but as I've indicated earlier, there are time constraints. But we've heard from our panelists on the question that was posed. Let me conclude by saying innovative technology is the way of the future and will steer aviation to places that we've never seen before. And therefore, we must embrace innovative technology or the advancement of technology. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking our panel for answering the questions and for sharing their insight with us. Let's give them a round of applause. Thank you.
It's okay. Chris, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Appreciate it. Thank you for that. Thank you.
Here, we want to take a picture. Just come. Thank you so much. You missed your opportunity.
I did, big time. That was unfair on me in terms of time.
Yeah, all of us. I still had a lot to say. What? You don't see it. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being with us and contributing to the success of this.
Thank you, Poppy and panelists, for a fascinating discussion. And yes, I know we have to move along, and I'm actually going to take my leave of you now. I need to return to Cape Town. I'm going to be handing over now to Chris Weigenthal, who's going to be taking you through for the rest of the day. Chris is also an industry, if I can use the word, stalwart. Has 24 years of experience in the airline industry, most notably with South African Airways, where he held several senior positions in petroleum affairs, flight operations, marketing, planning, and global passenger services, as well as with the Alliance Air, based in Uganda, where he was the MD. In February 2002, Chris joined the Airlines Association of Southern Africa as the Deputy CEO and became the Chief Executive in 2009. The Airlines Association of Southern Africa has got 20 airline members, which are the commercial scheduled airlines of the SADC region, as well as 31 associate members comprising of industry, manufacturers, suppliers, and of course the service providers and partners like ATNS and the Airports Company to the airline industry. So enjoy the rest of the day. I hope it's a fulfilling and more stimulating discussion, and I'll leave you in my colleague Chris's very capable hands. Thank you.
Thank you, Lyndon, and safe travels back to Cape Town. Certainly a pleasure for me just to help out with towards the end of the Avia Frick 2018. We've got 2 more panels to go, which we're going to finish before we go to lunch. I'm going to ask the panel moderators to please manage their time, to restrict it to about 40-45 minutes, including allowing some time if you want to go out for questions to the audience as well. Our second panel discussion, we're going to be exploring how the aviation industry can leverage innovative technology for advancement, taking into consideration the operating environment. Could CDM be the answer? And moderating this discussion will be Mr. Simon Zwane. Henny Marais unfortunately could not be with us. He's a senior manager in ATM planning, research and development, and the ATM CNS department at ATNS. So I've asked Simon to come and join us and introduce his panel. Simon, there you go. Please help us welcome him on stage, and then he'll introduce his guests.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. How are you this afternoon? Looks like the energy is very low, so I intend not to keep you for a long time. Thanks, Chris. As they have said, my name is Simon Zwane. I work for ATNS. I work in the ATM department. I have been asked to facilitate this topic, which I happen to like very much because it's about what we do. Sure. I didn't know that this stage is so intimidating. But nonetheless, I shall ask the following people to come and join me so that it doesn't feel as scary as it does now. So if I can have Ms. Bonnie Dibate from Kenzo, Mr. Hein Reed from ATNS, Mr. Reddy, I believe is from DRC, and Ms. Sandrina from Côte d'Ivoire. So you can just give them a big round of applause as they come up. Thank you. Right, so yesterday as I was doing a couple of presentations, I had a very good experience of feeling like I was a movie actor. I had a lady standing at the back, you know, doing that countdown. Do you know this countdown? Where they start saying 10, 9, 8, and they get to a point where they just keep quiet and they do this. And that indicates that you're about to start. So ladies and gentlemen, join us as we embark on this very interesting journey, and please be with us, and let's have this discussion openly. It's called collaborative decision making, which is all about partnership. So can we be partners for the next 40 minutes and just, work together on this one? Right, so as you have heard that there was a slight change in this program, so I will not really go into detail in terms of introducing my panel. And maybe when I do ask a question to them, maybe they can say just who they are, who they represent. Right. So why a CDM, one may ask. So it is estimated that in the next 2 decades, air traffic within the African continent is meant to even double up to the numbers that we see today. IATA estimates that about 274 million passengers are going to be destined for this continent alone. And this is seen as a 5.9 increase of overall traffic growth that is anticipated in the next few years. Now, it becomes very important that as a region we have a robust plan in place that we can be able to cater and cope with this expected growth. Now, my panel is going to assist me in breaking it down as to how, as a region, we can better prepare ourselves to deal with this expected growth. And add into that, we have seen new entrants in our system, in the likes of unmanned aerial systems, your drones, RPS, and whatever you want to call them. So these as well, as much as we put plans together to cater for the growth, we must be mindful of these systems that are coming through. So to meet this expected growth, our task is to make sure that we are utilizing all the practical tools that are available at our disposal. That includes technology. And to add on that, we need to be innovative in the way that we think. As you know, that technology is very much fast-paced. So what works today, tomorrow may not be ideal. So hence, we need to be innovative in the way we do what we do. So considering the fact that we cannot, this planning or this plan that we're developing to meet this growth cannot be done in isolation. So, and again, we keep on talking about partnership. So for us to be able to exist in the future, there is a great call for partnership. We need to partner together, not only within ANSPs, but with the regulators, with the airline industry as a whole. Right, I'm just being innovative with my technology here. I'm trying to stay ahead of it. Right, so if we're saying that the aviation industry through innovation is seen as an enabler to meet the expected growth. Right, so I want to bring in my panelist in this moment in time. And I'll start with Mr. Eddie. And what I would like him to share with us is how does he see technology as a benefit and as an enhancer of or within the CDM industry. Mr. Eddie, if you can share with us your experience and how do you see this innovative thinking, this technology being an enabler within this environment that we operate at?
Good day, everyone. Simon, thank you very much for your questions. So shortly, my name is Eddie Kioni. I'm Deputy CEO of RVA, DRC ANSP. I just want to say that maybe to be the first one to respond to that question was quite funny because in terms of CDM, it's a new concept for the DRC who recently joined Council and who is putting all the efforts not to be left behind, to use an expression that we all know. But having said that, I want to say, first of all, that the main topic of the summit is innovation, technology innovation. We have three types of innovation, as we all know: product innovation, process innovation, and business model. And I think for all the three aspects of innovation, we may face disruptions that we need to be prepared. Technology is fine, but I want to highlight that it's just one of the pillars on which we need to build our objective, to create a seamless airspace, because that's what CDM is about, to make sure that, as it has been said previously by other panelists, that we build an environment where collaboration will be the key. What do I want to say about it? I think that our main focus should be people before technology. It has been said here that technology cannot drive the dynamic. We need, first of all, to sensibilize all the people involved in this dynamic, meaning all the stakeholders in the industry. Okay? We need to make sure that at political level, that there is a common understanding of the objective that we want to share all. Then to make sure that we always keep in mind a regional perspective. Why do I say that? Maybe not homogeneous. We have different environmental constraints within the regions that we need to take into account. The processes that will be developed need to be strategized in order to choose the right technology. That's where maybe I will respond directly to your questions. I think the main point is to make sure that we innovative enough in the way we choose the technology, in the way we not only consume the technology but produce technology, because it will fit to our context, to our environment, and to make sure that we can share what I will call a main layer in terms of technology that can be shared among all the members of the regions. Keeping in mind that based on the needs and the constraints of each region, members can add the layer that are more contextualized with the needs on their airspace. So technology is what we need, is not an option, it's a must, but only if we see it as a mean and not as an objective. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Eddy, for giving us all these inputs. And one of the things that you're mentioning is a no country left behind approach. And you talk about emphasis on people. Mr. Reid, we know that if we talk technology and the focus in the future in terms of personnel in the workspace, there's technology coming up in terms of robotic technologies. And what's your view in terms of investment in people in this aspect? Do you see people being the important factor in this aspect, or should we rather invest more on technology in terms of robotic? Your view.
Good afternoon, everyone. Simon, I think that we often suffer from an
Mombasa ATFM implementation, and in that document we have all the stakeholders. We have IATA, we have the airlines, we have the ANSPs who have come together and have come up with a plan of how to implement ATFM, because ATFM will have both ACDM and CDM within it. We've come up with a plan which I would really invite participants in this conference to, read as soon as we make it available. This plan is going to assist in coming up with guidelines as to how the whole of Africa, what we have done, we have come up with a map of Africa, and we have compartmentalized it to ensure that ATFM is properly implemented. Just to add to what my colleague has said here, that yes, there is no regulation, but we are not emphasizing regulation. We emphasizing more collaboration and more discussions together. I'll end there for now.
Thank you, Sisboni, and thanks for sharing us the plans that Kenzo is also pursuing in trying to make sure that the CDM platform is created regionally and also globally. Mr. Reid, we talk about CDM being all about partnership, and obviously the sharing of information being the critical aspect of it. Would you think it's necessary that if there is a deficiency in an ATM system, that being shared with the industry? And if you think that is necessary, maybe you can just elaborate why would you find it necessary?
Thanks, Simon. I think as the demand grows, new entrants and all of that, as the demand grows on the national or the regional air traffic systems, decision-making becomes more and more important. And one could argue that the quality of your decision is based on the quality of the information that you base it on. So I think there's the business case for sharing information as widely as possible. The flip side, of course, is if with all this integration in theory of different sources of information may bring about some risks, as we heard earlier this morning. Having said that, I think we need to have access to each other's information, so to say, to the extent that when we are dealing with adverse weather conditions, when we are dealing with whatever adverse operating environment, that we can recover from that as quickly as possible. In the commercial air navigation environment, it is important that the customers keep on flying. And that we get them back in the air as quickly as possible following any of these events. And as I said, for me, access to information is paramount and a key enabler in that regard.
Thank you, Mr. Reid. In other words, the better informed, better prepared. And then as an operator, you can then plan properly if you have all the information at your disposal. Mr. Eddy, what are some of the benefits of a mature CDM system that you can think about?
Thank you, Simon. I think to some extent my colleague already answered the questions. The CDM systems is first of all an approach. It's a new approach to do the business better, our business, to make sure that we can, as he said, collect and share among all stakeholders information in a more efficient way and use them when needed in a way that will avoid the silo effect that it has been said previously. CDM, to me, is simply the best way to express what our industry is. We like a system with subsystem within an environment, meaning that if we approach our activity in a systemic approach, it means that we have to make sure that each stakeholder access accurately, as quickly as possible, to the right information to take the proper decisions, keeping in mind that it will affect the other stakeholders. And as Bonnie said, we sometimes make a confusion between the concept of ATFM, CDM, SCDM, but if we split them, we will keep in mind that we're talking here about the en route CDM, the airport CDM, that you can split between land side and air side, and then you will understand that with the use of the technology, that was the topic of the day, that are feed with the right information, probably by human being, then we have the chance to develop an efficient platform for successful operations, for which safety remains the main focus.
Thank you so much, and I like the way that you say it has to be a systematic approach, and I think that is very important. If I can ask Ms. Sandrina, we say CDM is about partnership. Who do you think would form that partnership beside the regulator?
I think this partnership shall be put in place by airport operator or NSPs, but not by the regulator. I don't know what you think, my colleague.
Thank you, and I think also the ARPA's operators, you think?
Yes.
Thank you for that. Ms. Bonnie, if I can just ask you maybe this question. We know that it's not all African states that form membership of KENZO. And having shared with us the plans that KENZO is rolling out, how does KENZO intend to reach out to those other stakeholders who does not necessarily belong to KENZO?
Thanks for the question, Simon, giving me an opportunity to market my organization. Thank you. I think whilst there are there were a few members. We actually have 33 now. We've grown from 4 to 33 because we have a ASECNA on board. So we have 15 plus 33. Plus 18, which is equal to 33. So it's not that bad. But how we intend bringing the others who are not members of KENZO is we have partnered with ICAO in terms of the implementation of the plan. We are then going to make sure that the work that we're doing gets aligned to all the ICAO processes, because anyway, what we started was informed by APEC 21. I think it says it all, that once we've partnered with ICAO, it's going to be it's going to be an implementation of the ICAO decision, and you know that ICAO is an organization which comes up with the recommended practices in our industry. Therefore, I'm assuming that then how many is left? 21. We are 55 states, so the 21 will then come on board.
Thank you, Ms. Bonnie. Mr. Reid, last question before they chase us out of the stage. for many times, sharing of information among the flying industry was seen as a competition. Is that your view, or you have a different view on that? In fact, the question is, it was seen that you equipping other people, and then it makes an unfair competition among them. Will that be your view at this point in time?
I'm tempted to say it's all about collaboration, but I could sound like someone else then. Having said that, I think the information that is necessary for the system to be optimized, rather than one of the role players in the system, that information should be available at a common platform level, if you wish, or at a public level. If organizations have the ability to gain economic leverage out of information that is in the public domain, then I suppose that's where the entrepreneurs come in. But for me, there's most certainly a component of, let me just call it public information, and then there may be commercially sensitive information. But we have to collaborate.
Thank you. In those words of Mr. Reid, collaboration. I want to bring in another word, partnership. So as we close, I mean, we have been made aware that PM is about no country left behind. So in this case, I would say no stakeholder left behind. So the more information we share, the better informed we are, and the better decision that we can make. I'd like to thank my panelists for spending time with me here. It wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. So thank you so much. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening and going this journey with us. Thank you.
Oops.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for handing out the gifts. Thank you and congratulations to Simon and the panelists. Stimulating debate. If I could just ask you to give them a round of applause, they walk back to their seats. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we're on the last panel discussion of the day and for the summit. We're going to be looking at the integration of remote piloted aircraft systems into South African airspace. And leading this interesting debate will be Mr. Jeffrey Machoba, Executive of ATM, CNS Planning and Standards at ATNS. Jeffrey will come up onto stage now. Help me welcome him, and he'll introduce his panelists. Thanks, Jeff. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Program Director. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm honored to be facilitating this panel. May I call the following people to join me in no significant order. Mr. Patrick Ndlovu, Mr. Zier Meyer, Mr. Simon Zwane, Mr. Sam Twala, Mr. Kevin Naidu, as well as Mr. Deepak Lala. As they come along, can we give them a round of applause, please? As they make their way here, let me quickly explain what are we dealing with here. The ICAO Circular 238 was dispatched to states, that is in 2011, appraising member states on this emerging technology during that time. But also it was encouraging, if you look at the last bullet there, it was encouraging states to help ICAO with the development of the policies as well as the SAPs, that is the standard and recommended practices, but also to share experience with ICAO and other states. We currently have the regulations, that is under Part 101. The regulations deal with those 6 parts, sub-parts. We've got the general provisions, in other words, how to operate the RPAS, and then the approval and personal licensing. The person that is operating the system for that particular aircraft system has to be certified by CAA. It's not as extensive as the pilot, I believe, but we'll hear more about that. The RPAS operation itself as well as the maintenance. The term RPAS, all in all, what you need to know about this, the definition of RPAS is an aircraft. You can call it drones, you can call it, the Australians, they call it unmanned aerial vehicles, but the ICAO term is RPAS, or the unmanned aircraft system. So what is RPAS? We will get there. So they come into different shapes and forms, which I think that's one of the reasons why they pose a challenge to us. To start the discussion, thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us. I did not choose the panel, so don't blame the parity or the equity when it comes to this panel. I did not choose the panel. That's a disclaimer. Zia, can I ask you to explain to us unpack the civil aviation regulation and what they say about the RPAS operation in the Republic?
Thank you, Jeff. So nobody can blame you for inviting me here today. Okay, thank you for having me. We have a regulation which speaks to remote pilot aircraft systems. It's called Part 101 of the Civil Aviation Regulations of 2011, and it came into effect in June of 2015. So we've got quite a bit of experience so far in its operation. What I'd like to do first is just to explain the RPAS regulations as they are, and then maybe if I can just touch on the way forward a little bit, or would you like to pose that to me later on? Okay, thank you.
Suit yourself.
So I think the introduction that Jeff gave is a very apt one in terms of the description of the systems that we are dealing with, is that they are piloted aircraft. So at the outset, they're aircraft. So whether they're small or they're large, they are aircraft. And as such, they are piloted. And in the context that we look at RPAS and in the ICAO context, they are remotely piloted aircraft. So our regulation aimed to identify or group into 3 separate components the use of unmanned systems with regard to the regulation. The first being the commercial use of RPAS. So if you're a business and you are going to charge somebody money to use your aircraft or to operate the aircraft on their behalf, you then fell into the corporate or the commercial use of RPAS. If you are a business entity and you use the aircraft to further the aims of your business, we call that the corporate use of RPAS. And if you used it for a non-profit purpose like search and rescue or fire monitoring or something along those lines, then we would call that non-profit. And we said that the regulation then applies to you. There's also one called private, but private is not subject to the stipulations of the regulation. And in order to operate an RPAS commercially, you would have to get an air service license from the Department of Transport and go through a process called the RPAS Operator Certification Process, or the ROC process. And that would entail the appointment of post holders, the drawing up of an operations manual, procedures, safety cases, very much similar to what manned aviation goes goes through in order to get certified as an operator. The only thing that a corporate or a non-profit would be exempt from would be the air services license. And if you operated under those three categories, you would require what's called an RPAS pilot's license or an RPL. At present, we have 5 schools or ATOs in the country that have been accredited to provide RPAS training or RPL training. Once you went through the entire process, you would be issued with an ROC certificate and an operation specification, which would then state what the privileges of your certification were. And at current, we're sitting with approximately 32, and I say approximately, it changes all the time, but the last I checked, we were sitting on 32 certified operators at the moment in South Africa, doing everything from being in the movie industry to land surveying to security surveillance. And that's where we are at the moment in terms of the regulation, who it applies to, how you go about getting it in place. Now, I asked Jeff's leave if I could just speak about where we were going to. So I'll just, instead of hogging all the airtime, I'm just going to plant the seed now, and I'm sure we'll take this discussion further with the rest of my panelists.
Sorry, Zia, before you get into where we're going, and probably you'll be assisted by this question, because you as the owner of the regulation, should I say the custodian of the regulation, you probably wouldn't know the challenges. Can we probably get the challenges from Kevin? Kevin, if you can, from your perspective, what are the challenges that have been experienced by the current regulations? In other words, the limitations, and probably from the service provider point of view, Deepak, if you can also share with us the challenges that have been experienced.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I'm going to answer from the perspective of the CSR because we have particular requirements. We're an R&D organization. And then I'm going to call a friend, which is 2 seats to my right, from an industry point of view to maybe describe some of the challenges from an industry point of view. So from a CSR point of view, we're a research organization. We look at early stage R&D, development of novel technologies, testing of novel technologies, and exploitation of these technologies for commercial benefit, innovation and commercial benefit. So currently, as the CSR, we have applied to the CAA for a research, to operate under a research license. And that is quite a big opportunity for us because that research license allows us to operate for non-commercial purposes, but it allows us a very efficient mechanism to do experimental development. So that's not a challenge, that's an opportunity for us. So under that sort of framework, we can test new technologies, we can test new ideas for products, because it's not commercial, and what we would like to do eventually is when proof of concept is achieved, make those technologies accessible and available for private operators, SMMEs, commercial companies. So that is actually an enabling thing from the CAA point of view. I guess the administration from the CSR side, has been a bit slow, but from the CAA side, that's quite an enabling opportunity. If I had to project into the future, because that's what the CSR does, it looks at the future technologies. I think where we go into a bit of unknown territory is when we look at fully autonomous systems. So what we've been speaking about now has been remotely piloted, and the regulations cater for that. When we look at fully autonomous, which is where most large research institutions are looking for in the future, because that's when you start really unlocking the value of technology, is looking at fully autonomous systems, decision-making, understanding failure modes, understanding how you recover from failure modes, and that is where the opportunity in the future lies, and I think that's where we need to look at R&D as a group or a consortium between the likes of CSR, between the likes of AT&S, CAA, industry. So as a consortium, leaving no stakeholder behind, we should look at how we enable industry in the future on that front. I'm going to hand over to Patrick from an industry point of view.
That's collaboration.
Thanks, Kevin. I'm from Denel. When we manufacture we call them UAS, unmanned aerial systems. One of the challenges that we have is considering the current environment, the non-definition of your minimum equipment standard is actually an issue for us because clearly there's an issue of the market that we will try to protect, and we believe the South African market is actually ours. And because there's currently no definition of a minimum equipment standard in ARPAS, you get all sorts of things proliferating into the country, doing all sorts of other things, and to the point where it might even taint the image of the ARPAS sector. I was watching a video the other day where one of these small quadcopters was actually flying up in the air, and the Boeing 737 was taking off. And because that thing is so small, and it was not visible to the pilot, the aircraft literally flew into the thing, and it clipped the wing or the wingtip of that aircraft. That's actually a direct issue of the fact that that thing was not visible, and because there's no minimum equipment standards defined. So for us, that's a serious issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Deepak?
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Deepak from the Central Airspace Management Unit, the ATNS. From an ANSP point of view, our biggest challenge around RPAS has been more the knowledge and operating behind RPAS. When the regulations were introduced, there was a lot of information that was shared, specifically around the regulations. What was not shared with the controllers was how these vehicles operate. And if you know an ATC, they fear the unknown. And as soon as you put something unknown into their system, they don't want to accept it. They're very hesitant to have an RPAS operating in controlled airspace. So from our point of view, the information sharing on how RPAS operated was very difficult for us to accept. And being in the Central Airspace Management Unit, where we share airspace with the whole country, when we send out flexible use of airspace where there's a drone that wants to operate overhead, or Tambo, for example, we tend not to get the approval. You'll have AXA, for example, that will want to survey some of their hangars. And the controller is hesitant to approve that because they don't know how these RPAS operate so close to controlled airspace. So that's been our greatest challenge at the moment. It's the controller's fear of the RPAS operating so close to the wide-body aircraft. What impact will that have on the wide-body aircraft?
Okay, thank you very much. And I think Zia, to assist you to share with us what is it that you are looking in terms of bettering the current regulation and making it easier for the industry to operate the system. Can I ask Sam to probably come up with any suggested ways of improving the current regulations, or anything that should be considered going forward? One of the challenges is the exclusion.
Thanks, Steph. One thing that I would firstly like to mention is what we need to take into account is, as Z has mentioned, Part 101 regulations came into effect in 2015. And it's been, a little bit over 3 years. And at a time when regulations, they were developed, I would sort of say they were based on theoretical or perceived risk at a time. And they were good at a time because it was a case of let's wait until we have a perfect solution, we'll still be waiting until today. Mm-hmm. So today we've learned a lot. We've gathered some data, and we understand how what operators need, what works for manufacturers, and what works and what doesn't work for air traffic controllers, and. So we are now in a position where we should say, yes, we have Part 101, and let's then perhaps start from the beginning and say, what is it that works in Part 101 and leave it as is, and what is it that doesn't work, and then take it out. And one of the things as well with regulations perhaps at the time is there was not really, there was a consultation, but perhaps people were not really participating in the process. So what needs to happen now is we need to have all role players in one room and start having discussions. Because one of the things with unmanned or remotely powered aircraft systems is people have different views and different ideas. So until we are in one room and have such a discussion, we'll always remain with our own individual opinions. So that's what we need to know. And to answer your question, one first thing that I think we need to do as a country, we need to start having a discussion around the concept of operation and agree as a country to say, this is how we're going to operate unmanned aircraft systems in the country, and this is how we're going to regulate them. That would at least be clear for everyone being in terms of role players, and that would be a good start.
Yeah, you choose your words carefully because you are central to the regulation. Probably that's one of the reasons why you're defending them so much. Azia?
Thank you, Jeff. I know we're running late, and I know everybody's keen to get home and beat the traffic, but unfortunately, there isn't a short answer to this, so I just ask for your understanding. So I would first like to just give a little bit of background about the beginning of your introduction, in which you described UAVs, UASs, and RPASs as being the same thing. You know, one of the challenges, and I'll allude to what Dr. Naidu has said in his presentation, or rather his input, is that this is a rapidly evolving field which is in constant R&D and development. So much so that I engaged with somebody involved with the Google delivery project in Australia, and they say that in the last 12 months, they're on their third set of motors for their drones, and you can't even get the first set because they don't exist anymore. So that's the speed at which this evolves. So if you look at our application, so we are regulated. We regulate aviation and all facets of aviation, but it's stuff we pretty much understand since the Second World War at least. Whether it's air traffic control or it's airports or it's flight operations, it's pretty much we stuck in our ways. So 101, and Sam may or may not agree with me, was kind of also shaped with that kind of thinking in the beginning. But it's very difficult to apply manned aviation standards to unmanned systems because the life cycle of a manned aircraft is 30 to 40 years. The life cycle of these motors that Google's using is 4 months. So it's very difficult and it requires a paradigm shift. Just coming back to the definition, UASs, you're quite correct, are unmanned aircraft systems. Now, in this changing environment, it's not only technology that's changing, it's regulators and ICAO and everybody else and all the stakeholders' understandings that are changing. So about a year and a half ago, ICAO started to press heavily on making it clear that there's a distinction between RPASs and all other UASs. So UASs, all RPASs are UASs. Not all UASs are RPASs. So I'll now go on to what Dr. Naidu mentioned. What he's mentioned is not this. So it's his concern, I understand it, but it's a universal concern. It's a dialogue being held in the four corners of the earth. It's a challenge being faced by every single nation on earth right now. So when we talk about RPASs are remotely piloted aircraft systems. That is the literal definition. There is a pilot that physically controls this aircraft. So in the South African context, all the Part 101 operators that we have certified do operate piloted aircraft. Even if they have automated modes, but there's one pilot, one aircraft, and that's the way they operate. So ICAO at the moment, and I've heard this being mentioned in some of the other panel discussions, where people say ICAO are a little bit behind, ICAO needs to catch up, ICAO. If you look at the context of remote pilot aircraft systems, ICAO is actually on track. Because ICAO, together with the ASBU program, sees integrated, non-segregated commercial RPAS operations in 2031. So what they see is a 737 category aircraft getting airborne from OR Tambo and flying freight to Lusaka or to London or to wherever you want it to fly to, cross-border, in the ATM environment, communicating with air traffic controllers. To that end, IFALPA and IATA were very vocal in the RPAS panel to make sure that manned aviation would not adapt to fit unmanned aviation, and that unmanned aviation in the RPAS context would have to fit into manned aviation. So that said, when an air traffic controller gives an instruction to a manned Springbok flying to London, he should be able to give the exact same instruction to the unmanned aircraft flying freight to Zambia at flight level 350. So in that sense, the only difference between an RPAS and a manned aircraft is you have a fully functional flight crew that interacts with the entire ATM environment in exactly the same way, except they're not sitting in the cockpit, they're sitting on the ground in what's called an RPS. So that's why 2031, because we're not there yet. We don't have those systems that are commercially available, although Boeing says they'll offer one for sale in 2028. Now that brings us to the more prudent topic. What about everything else? So what about the small aircraft that are going to fly in what Dr. Naidu alluded to as autonomous, although there's a big debate about autonomous versus automated? And here's the key to this. The reason we have to make the distinction between RPAS and other UASs is that you can't deliver packages for Amazon, DHL, or UPS if they have pilots. Now, I don't know if you guys know this, so some people are going to think I'm a stuck record because I've been meeting people in the last 2 days and I'm kind of rehashing what I've been telling them. So if you've heard this before, I apologize. Did you know that in China, right now, there are 60,000 drones doing package delivery? Right now, operationally. They don't have a single pilot. Not one of those are piloted. Because you cannot use small drones to do package delivery, blood sample delivery, infrastructure monitoring, all those type of things if they have pilots. It doesn't work. You can't have 1,000 drones being piloted from Midrand to Sandton. It just doesn't work. So already 101 doesn't speak to that because 101 talks about a pilot license, it talks about having an operator or a pilot for each aircraft. So our regulations actually does speak to what the future holds. It doesn't speak to the challenges that we're going to face in the very near future. That said, I'd just like to touch on something quickly just to put everybody into the picture so we all know where we're going. Autonomous versus automated. It is quite correct now, and I've heard presentations from Boeing Next Gen and from Airbus's drone division, they use the term autonomous. So the term autonomous, I actually forgive the use of the word autonomous because we know what it means. It means that you tell the drone to go from point A to point B and it does it all on its own. Nobody sits there and monitors the flight path or anything like that. ICAO has an issue with the term autonomous because the ICAO manual document 119 says that no aircraft shall be autonomous. We won't allow autonomous aircraft in civilian airspace. So we're going to have to, from ICAO's perspective, change the definition of what autonomous versus automated is. And to that end, the NASA representative to ICAO panel, he suggested, it was just a suggestion, he suggested a very novel and a very I'm having a loss of words, but it's a very elegant solution for the definition. Because in the past we said, when a human has full input into a system, it's just an automated system. Like a pilot sitting in front of an autopilot, he can switch it on, switch it off, tell the autopilot go left, right, climb, descend. In an autonomous system, this machine's doing its own thing. But we need to now change the definition because we can't have systems doing their own things in civilian airspace. What happens if there's a civil emergency? We have a security emergency, another 9/11. We've had control over the South African airspace during the World Cup, during the death of Nelson Mandela. So there are cases where you need to control the airspace and you can't have machines doing their own thing. So the NASA guy suggested that we change the definition from piloted without human intervention to predictable performance. So it then becomes that if there's true artificial intelligence and a machine decides I'll go left because I feel it's correct to go left, that would be autonomous, and we don't want that in civilian airspace. But if a machine says I'll go left because I've been given, whether it's 1, 2, 3 or 50,000 programming conditions, I'll go left because according to my programming conditions, it's deemed to be the best course of action as I was programmed to do. Okay, I'll keep it short. Then I'll cut it off now. These are the challenges that we face, right? So where do we go from here? I agree with Deepak, right? And I agree totally with Sam. So where do we go from here? We need to actually now clearly define the RPAS remotely piloted from the UASs. That's where the concept of UTMs come in. This is where the concept of a UTM versus an ATM comes in, and the interoperability between the two. And we certainly need to come back to the drawing board and now start writing regulation for unmanned aircraft systems as a whole that will or may or may not be piloted.
Thank you, Sia. Thank you very much. You can feel it, you can hear it. He keep on saying, referring to ICAO, for those who are not aware or familiar with the acronym, ICAO is the International Civil Aviation Organization, an organization that oversees the civil aviation in the whole world. So you talk about UTM, and before maybe Simon share with us ATNS intentions with respect to how they're going to integrate RPAS into civilian airspace. May I ask, Patrick, what's currently there from Dinel's perspective? What do you have, and are we going to see an air taxi from Mamelodi to Pretoria?
Okay, I just want to give a perspective in terms of from an operations point of view, the amount of challenge that we have with regards to RPAS. In our research, we've figured out that there's actually about 4 types of unmanned aerial systems that you actually get. You get the small, medium-sized multi-copter drones that fly just very low altitude. And then you get the other type, which you call it the air mobility vehicles. And these are the air taxis that he's actually talking about. And I must say that internationally, there's close to $5 billion investment in that type of transport. So it is actually coming, we cannot ignore it. And there's a type that will normally fly above Johannesburg, ferrying people from Sandton to Braamfontein to Eastgate. And then we've got the stuff that we normally build. It's actually a long-range, long-endurance UAVs. They operate anywhere between 10,000 feet and 60,000 feet altitude. And then we've got unmanned balloons that are used for all sorts of emergency support infrastructure that also fly very, very high. Now, if you look at the range in terms of altitudes that you're dealing with, I know there's a tendency to think that these RPAS, we're only looking at 400 feet and then we are sorted out. It's not like that. Our UAVs, the ones that we currently build, can fly 250 kilometers at 18,000 feet. That is where your normal 737 will actually fly from here to Durban. So the integration problem is actually real and it's actually massive. It's not a simple thing that you can just segregate in a space and then you sort it out. I think it requires, to tackle this program, it requires a thorough effort from all the stakeholders to actually deal with this challenge. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Mr. Zwane, are you ready to receive them?
Thank you, Chair. I was an air traffic control by training, so I'm going to be straight to the point. So ATNS is following the total inclusive approach in terms of integrating these systems. We are using the vehicle, the ATM CNS implementation committee. We have adopted this RPAS as one activity in our work groups. And I think the major thing that we have, as you have heard here when everybody speak, is that there's been silos. Everybody's doing their own thing in their own corners. And the first approach is to bring everybody together, and we intend to do that. Thank you.
So, by the looks of things, there's still a lot to be done. We tend to refer to other nations with respect to their capabilities and capacity when it comes to technology. I mean, we just heard from Mr. Ndlovu a lot of work that they are doing in manufacturing this kind of technology. And I think it's something that we need the industry to work towards with DINEL, obviously, and the Civil Aviation Authority, to make sure that we produce our own and we show the world that we are capable of introducing new technology. Please join me in thanking our panel. We have come to the end of our session. Sorry, again?
Excuse me, just one observation. Please tell the RPAS people, colleagues, tell the RPAS colleagues to keep away from our controlled space.
That's why we're coming.
Thank you. Can I do something?
Thank you. Well done. Thanks so much. Mr. Bedard, ATNS, one of the directors on ATNS.
Is it?
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, help me thank our panelists and the moderator, Jeff, and the team for a great discussion there. I think we learned a lot from that one. Thank you. We've come to the end of the session, and I really want to thank all the panelists and all the moderators, all of those who volunteered the expertise and insights to sit on these panels and to prepare and to give their insights on these topical issues. As to close the event, I'd like to call on Dr. Sandile Malinga to join me on stage to close the summit. And just after that, again, to remind you, we're going to have a group photograph on the steps just outside the main entrance, you know where the red carpet was? Right there. So, Dr. Malinga.
Okay, thanks so much. I don't want to take too much of your time. I would just want to thank our chair, Mr. Tovela, and all the board members who've been with us in the past couple of days. We thank you for supporting us and for your leadership. I also like to thank representatives from the DOT, Mr. Pierre Jose, and Ms. Janine Prince, who is still here. Is Janine still around? She was earlier on, and any other official from the DOT. Thank you. As our shareholder, we value your presence and your support in such events. I would like to thank our speakers who came from afar, all around the African continent, as well as the panelists. We value what you contributed, the insights that you shared with us. Without those, really, this summit would not have been the success it has been. We really want to thank you. I would like us to just clap hands to everyone who's contributed as a panelist or a speaker to this summit. Obviously, as a state-owned entity, we are triplets. It's us, AXA, and the Civil Aviation Authority. And so we would like to thank our brother or sister, AXA, as well as the Civil Aviation Authority, the DCA who was here with us, and as well as a team, as well as AXA as our sponsors. We would like to thank you for that. And then more importantly for us, Chris, Asa, we are very, very indebted to you. Basa, Arthur, June has left now. We want to thank the industry as well as Yata at the back there. Thank you for your support. We will forever endeavor to service you, to provide you with the services as an industry that you expect from us and that you deserve from us. We'd like to thank our partners, the CSIR, ASAF, TIA, as well as SANSA, the South African Weather Services. They were here, they are also here as well. And thank you for supporting us as our partners. Aviation can never, ever succeed without these kinds of partnerships. And then we'd like to thank our sponsors, Thales and AEME. Without your support and your sponsorships, this will not have been successful. The suppliers, big and small, the exhibitors who've contributed to the success of our summit, we would like to thank you, the stands and all the things that you shared, and with our participants, we really want to thank you. What we did here would have not been going out there without the media. We want to thank the media practitioners who are with us and who've been with us since yesterday. And obviously, anything that we did here would not have been successful without your participation. We want to really applaud you and to thank you, each and every one of yourselves who's participated in this summit. An event like this one it doesn't happen by chance. It just doesn't happen, all right? It happens because people planned it, worked very tirelessly behind the scenes to make it happen. And so I would like to thank Percy, as well as I won't mention each and every one of yourselves who've made this a success, but I would like to thank Percy and the team from ATNS who's really worked very hard to make this a reality. We start planning this quite early in the year, but the time is just too short for us to actually do it well. But it wouldn't have been possible without that effort. Obviously, Michelle, thank you. As our agent who assists us in such things, and your team, okay, you still don't have gray hairs, and so I don't know how you survive, because we chop and change and do all sorts of other things which make you go crazy. Thank you for your understanding and for being flexible and making this a success. And lastly, I would like to apologize. We've gone beyond our time. We would have liked to finish much earlier, but thank you for your forbearance and for your understanding and for making RV Africa 2018 the success it has been. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And lunch is served. Lunch is served. Thank you very much. See you next year. Same venue, Percy, is it?
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I'm not going to repeat any of the thanks because I think Dr. Malinga has done it. Thank you. I hope you've enjoyed your last 2 days here. Thanks to everybody for being here, for sponsors, presenters, everybody. Please just join us now for a last photograph at the steps, and then the braai is ready and you've earned your lunch. So enjoy it, and we'll see you down there. Thank you very much, and good afternoon. Yeah.